Hi, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I'm super relaxed as well.
Yeah.
I've been seeing Margot for a few years. Actually, she was one of the first people I saw when I first got diagnosed with vestibular migraine, and I was looking for something very balancing. So I started doing some beginning ballet classes with her, which really helped my brain compensate, which is kind of an important part of vestibular disorders. So yeah, it's been incredible for my healing. So if anyone has, some sort of vestibular part to their migraine, like I highly recommend beginning ballet classes and this restorative yoga to kind of help reset and everything. And so that was a great way to start. I'm going to go into my story and share my slides. So I can screen share here. Share this. And then here we are. Can everyone see that?
Yep, looks good.
Yes. Okay, good. So I'm Alicia Wolf. I have a new cookbook. It's called Managing Migraine, with 90 comforting recipes and lifestyle tips. Some of you may have already heard of me. If you haven't, I basically started this website like 2 or 3 years ago after being diagnosed with chronic vestibular migraine. So I'll kind of share my story with you from the beginning. My journey was really difficult. At the time, there's a lot more resources for vestibular migraine now, but at the time there was like nothing online. And there was certainly no distinction of what it meant to have vestibular migraine. The resources online weren't super clear on whether you had to have head pain with that or anything. And so when I started getting these feelings of dizziness, I was newly married. We had just gone on this big trip to Japan, across Japan and Thailand, and had come back, and I worked in a really stressful job at the time in watch development. And so I wasn't sleeping. My sleep schedule was all messed up. I was really stressed out, and I got really sick one weekend. We were flying to go to a wedding. And after that, I noticed feelings of just dizziness and instability. It felt like I was walking on clouds or marshmallows. It felt like I was moving when I was standing still. Like one time, I always say this, but one time I was driving all my coworkers to lunch, and it felt like my car was moving forward, and I had been in park, and I slammed on my brakes, and everyone looked at me like I was nuts. And they're like, we're just sitting here in park. And I thought at that moment, I was like, okay, there's something seriously wrong with my brain, but what could it be? It was such a strange sensation. So I started out with my general practitioner, and she just basically told me, look, you're tired, you're stressed, here you can take this steroid course. Maybe it's a virus that, kind of messed with your ears a little bit, and you'll feel fine. So I did the steroid course and I didn't feel better. And so instead of going back to her, who was just giving me meds to kind of cover it, I went to an ENT. ENT ran all these tests on me. And this was supposed to be like Dallas's best ENT. And he ran all these tests, and there was no issue with my hearing. So he ruled out Meniere's disease. He ruled out BPPV, which can be loose crystals in your ear that can kind of cause vertigo and dizziness. He basically said I looked totally healthy. Maybe it was stress, but I could try vestibular therapy for a while. So he sent me off to these vestibular therapists. And I did vestibular therapy like religiously for probably a month. And at the time, they were also just pushing steroids at me as much as they could. And I started feeling a little bit better, but as soon as I stopped them, I got significantly worse. So I remember one night my husband rushed me to the ER because I was having a horrible vertigo attack. And I was like, this is it. I have a brain tumor. Like there's something wrong with my brain. And of course, the doctors diagnosed me with vertigo and sent me home with meclizine. And we all know, like, vertigo is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. So I saw some of the best doctors in Dallas, neurologists, who just looked at me and told me I was anxious, that I was depressed. I had people tell me I had a small tear in my inner ear that would require surgery, that would make me go deaf. All these different doctors. And finally, I decided, I reached out to my friends on Facebook and I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. Like, does anyone have an expert that they know in dizziness? And sure enough, I got referred to the Mayo in Arizona. And the ENT there, he looked at me and he said, you have vestibular migraine after 2 days of testing. I said, no, that's crazy. I don't get head pain. I don't get headaches. Isn't that what a migraine is? And he goes, no, like migraine can manifest itself in all different ways, as dizziness, light sensitivity, vertigo, and even these weird feelings of walking on marshmallows, or like I existed outside my body, like very dissociative symptoms, just some of the strangest symptoms I've ever had. And I couldn't quite believe that that was connected with migraine. He said, you know, as an ENT, he couldn't really treat me. I needed a neurologist. Well, at that time, a spot ended up opening up with the dizzy doctor. And this was with Dr. Shin Bei at UT Southwestern. And so that's why I love being a part of Dallas Education Day, because UT Southwestern was a huge part of my healing with migraine. And of course, Dr. Bei went through all of his testing with me, and he was like, yep, you have this classic vestibular migraine. So we started off on a treatment plan, but I kind of told him, like, look, I'm newly married, I'm 30 years old, you know, I want to have a family soon. And so treating this naturally, even though I was 24/7 dizzy, so sick, I couldn't work. I was like, I really want to look into how I can treat this, but still try to have a family in the near future. So that was really important to me. And I really appreciated that Dr. Bei didn't say, oh, no, you can't do that. You have to take all these meds. He really tried to work with me on a medication plan that I could easily wean off of, or that would fit with me through pregnancy. So that's a sign of a great doctor, you know, someone who listens to you, someone who tries to work with you on what you want, and you kind of come together on an agreement. I did end up losing my career to vestibular migraine. And so I was just very lost at the time. They weren't very cooperative. I'm sure many of us have experienced this in jobs before, where you feel pushed out. I certainly did. They made no accommodations for me. I have some information on my website about FMLA, and I won't go into all that right now because I don't think we have time, but just how I wish I would have consulted with a lawyer, and I just kind of went about everything the wrong way and trusted HR. And, you know, we have to be so careful about that sometimes with migraine, because we can be taken advantage really easily. So I was kind of in this weird space where I didn't really know what to do with my life at the time. So I was at home all day when I used to have a very demanding career. And I just kind of put all my energy into healing. Like, what can I do to heal? Are there any treatments out there that would help support what I was already doing with Dr. Bei? I thought I would get pregnant right away, and it turns out we also went through infertility. So not only was I trying to manage migraine just by itself, but I was also trying to manage migraine along with navigating infertility and what that meant with taking drugs like Clomid and things that affect your hormones and everything like that. So I had like a doozy basically of things going on. And one of the things I put myself into was researching a migraine diet and how that can support everything else I was doing with medication, supplements, mindfulness, exercise. And so I looked at a few different ones, and the one that seemed to be either the most popular or the most talked about was the Heal Your Headache diet, or they call it the Johns Hopkins diet. Sometimes it's a patient handout they have. But migraine diets in general, and I think why a lot of doctors frown on them, is they can be really overwhelming and restrictive. I don't know if any of you have tried them previously before, but it just feels like almost too much when you're already dealing with migraine. And so I used to love to cook. I would make amazing meals for us every weekend, like 4-course, 5-course meals. But this was before I got sick. And combining that with a migraine diet was really challenging for me because I missed things like citrus and the things you have to eliminate. And there were very few resources at the time. So, you don't feel well, you're trying to eat better, make the right changes, but you don't really have any support. And it just makes it really difficult to follow a diet. And I just noticed there was just such a lack of recipes, good recipes, especially resources, things I wanted to eat. So I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a fun food blog that was like Smitten Kitchen or Pinch of Yum that was geared towards someone with migraine, and that kind of viewed food in a positive way versus, oh, you can't have this, you can't have that. It was like, look at all the things you can eat. So as I started creating recipes for myself, I thought, well, someone else has got to be interested in this. So through all these changes I was making, I started off feeling a little bit better with just medication and supplements. But once I added in the diet was really when I got to have dizzy-free days again. And I know if you've ever been through chronic migraine, just having like a day, a moment of relief is so sweet. And you just crave it over and over and over again. You're like, how can I get more of these days? And that's how I was. I was like, I would do anything. I would saw off my left arm if it would give me these sweet moments of relief, of where I felt like I was on solid ground. And so that's kind of why I felt surely there's someone out there who would feel like me, who would appreciate these kind of resources. So that's how I kind of created this recipe and resource website. I love cooking because it gives you a sense of accomplishment. It really, when I lost my job, I felt totally worthless. So I was very wrapped up in my career and not knowing where I was going to go from that, who would hire me in the state I was in with the accommodations I needed, like as far as light and movement sensitivity. I just felt like, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard to find a job in my same career. I need computer breaks, and cooking sort of brought back that passion into my life. It gave me that sense of purpose that I was missing. If there was one thing I could do that day to get off the couch, it was to cook and make a nice meal. And when my husband enjoyed it or my family enjoyed it, it made me feel so good about myself. And I really needed to feel good about myself. I like that you can control the ingredients. So many things when we eat out now, it's just filled with a lot of additives or preservatives or flavorings. And when you cook at home, you can control all of those. And if there's something that is a particular trigger for you, you can easily eliminate it. You're always learning something new when you cook. So sometimes we screw up, but I feel like there's always a lesson to be learned from it. Like I burnt rice the other day, and I'm a food blogger. I felt so stupid. I was like, who burns rice? But I'm finally newly pregnant and very excited about it, but it's also been very hard on me. Our IVF transfer ended up working, but it's also been a little hard on my head and nausea and everything like that. So I'm just starting to get back into cooking, and I just had to learn to give myself a little bit of grace because it's hard to keep up sometimes, either when you're dealing with chronic illness or your head just doesn't feel like it's in the right place. So give yourself some grace and, consider it as a learning experience. Some people find baking to be very meditative and therapeutic because of all the steps it takes. I find cooking to be that way. Like you sort of shut everything out in the background, maybe listen to music, and it can just be your quality time instead of just something stressful you have to do just to eat. Try to enjoy that moment. For me, it was vestibular therapy, like looking from one ingredient to the next, sort of help my brain retrain itself to accept movements, certain movements in the kitchen, stirring, that sort of thing, just kind of getting my eyes accustomed to those movements. It can really bring your family together and help you feel better. So I think as people with migraine, we see cooking as this burden, but if you just shift your thinking a little bit and try to make it a fun experience and maybe get your family involved with you too, it can really become something that brings you a lot of joy and maybe a sense of purpose or accomplishment, like it was for me. Some tips for cooking with migraine, because we all need them. Start slow and easy. Don't feel like you have to make a 5-course dinner. These chicken zucchini poppers are on my website. They're great if you're keto, low carb. I know that works for some people with migraine. Basically, all it is ground chicken, grated zucchini, a few spices, and a really easy sauce made with cilantro. These freeze super well. So meatballs, casseroles, anything you can just kind of do on one dish or one pan and that can freeze well is really good to start with. Planning ahead, 3 or 4 recipes, meal planning, always super helpful, especially if you can double batch things like meatballs and use them in different plans. Like I have in my meal plan online, I have a pulled pork, which freezes beautifully, and you can, pair it with barbecue sauce for barbecue pulled pork one day, and then the next 2 or 3 days later, freeze it, 2 or 3 days later, bring it out, and use it in corn or flour tortillas for pulled pork tacos. So it's the same meal, but it's done in 2 different ways, and you are able to get 2 different meals out of it, which is helpful. You can find grocery favorites and healthy snacks as you go. The first month for me was really hard, just kind of reading labels. And then as I got used to it, I found favorites that I just always stick with. And so I have a list of these online too, if you're ever interested. Again, getting your family on board. If they like the recipes and they're good, they're going to want to help you stick with it. So, maybe things like meatloaf, mac and cheese, that sort of thing. I have these recipes in my cookbook, but when I was developing cookbook recipes, I knew I had to make things that even your kids or your husband would love, or your wife, if that's who you're cooking for. But I just want to assure everyone, don't be discouraged. Like, it's hard to start, but once you get there, you get used to it, and you find fun things, you find recipes you love, and it becomes a good time. These are all the recipes from my cookbook. There's gooey white chocolate blondies. We have queso. There's also dairy-free recipes if that's an issue for you. Like this party mix is made without MSG. So I know a lot of us are familiar with Chex Mix. It's kind of like that, but without any MSG added to that, if that's an issue for you. And then these are vegan Mexican stuffed sweet potatoes. So there's a little bit something for everyone, depending on your dietary restrictions. How I became a migraine advocate. So basically, as I started the Dizzy Cook, I wanted to get involved and raise awareness for vestibular migraine. So the perfect place for me to start was with the only website that was really telling me what was going on with myself in the very beginning, and that was VITA. It's called vestibular.org, and it's the Vestibular Disorders Association. So maybe you have a comorbidity with Meniere's disease. Some people with vestibular migraine have Meniere's disease, BPPV. I know people who get dizziness with their migraine attacks. If you have any sort of vestibular component, they're a really great resource. And I became an ambassador with them, just kind of writing articles, sharing their events, getting involved in their Balance Awareness Week. And that was kind of my entry into becoming an advocate for this illness. I started sharing my journey on Instagram, Facebook, recently YouTube videos, which is, there's a crazy community on there too. So if you have trouble writing and staring at a computer, I highly recommend YouTube, because just set up your camera and start talking. And a lot of people like to listen instead of reading. So I found that to be very helpful for people with migraine too. That's a good alternative if being on a computer all day is hard for you. You never know who's watching or reading. So what's crazy to me is how my book came along. Is my editor, she used to publish Williams-Sonoma cookbooks, and she also struggled with vestibular migraine. So she was looking for resources to help her with that, and stumbled on my blog, loved reading it, looked forward to the posts every week. And she just reached out to me and was like, would you ever be interested in publishing a book? And I thought she was joking. I thought it was like one of those scams, like you pay them a certain amount of money and they'll publish your book for you. But it was very legit. And I published with West Margin Press this year. It was about 2 years of work though, from start to finish. So again, you never know who's out there being an admirer of you. It could be, a celebrity. You just can never tell. So sharing your story is super important. And it can be as easy as that for being a migraine advocate. My first book, it came out in February. It was one of the #1 Amazon bestsellers, which was really exciting. I think COVID, unfortunately, came at a really rough time. I had lots of events scheduled and everything got canceled. So we're kind of riding the waves of that. It's a little disappointing to have your first book come out during a national pandemic, but who could have thought of that? So yeah, just kind of going with the flow, as we learn to do with migraine, right? But make friendships and connections. Like, I've met so many amazing people. I think last year, Shirley had reached out to me about maybe doing a migraine support group with Miles for Migraine. And I knew I didn't have it in me to be a support group leader, because being a support group leader is you have to be a very strong person, mentally, and I think emotionally and physically, to be there for other people. And while I love messages from people, it I was going through a lot at the time with my infertility. And so we kind of decided I would do these Dallas Miles for Migraine meetups, where we would get the community together. So we had one of the doctors from UT Southwestern come speak at our first meeting. I brought my Pepita protein bars, and we just all connected and had a great time. And, it can be whatever you make it. Like, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to start a whole website. You can just start posting your story on Instagram. You can start making YouTube videos. Reach out to Miles for Migraine, Champs. Some of these organizations are always looking for help, even behind the scenes. Like Vita, I used to make calls to new donors, thanking them for their donation. So it can just be as small or as big as you want to make it. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. So some of these pictures, like this was my first event with all the ladies in New York City. We picked the worst place to meet, which was in Times Square. That was my bad. I didn't realize this place would like have all the signs and everything like that. But we ended up laughing about it, because as a bunch of people with chronic migraine or vestibular migraine, like, we were so proud of ourselves to be able to sit there and not be super triggered by it, which we could have never done a few years ago. So that was really exciting and a funny moment for all of us. That was right before everything shut down. And then the same thing, this was me giving at one of my speaking engagements in Phoenix at Changing Hands. And, just being able to share about my journey with vestibular migraine has been very exciting. One last thing, you can write for, Migraine Again, the Mighty. They will often take submissions. So just approach them, and they're always looking for people to help out with that. Some final resources in my closing. You can go to my website, thedizzycook.com. I have books on thedizzycookshop.com, so that supports me as an author, and also the website directly, but you can also buy it through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. again, all my information is on here. If you ever need help, if you want to try a migraine diet, you're super confused on where to start, recipe help, anything like that, I have a Facebook book group called the Dizzy Cook Recipe Chat, and I'll help you with any of the recipes or issues you have with cooking. And then some of the other things I'm enjoying, like if you have vestibular migraine, Dr. Bay just came out with a new book called Victory Over Vestibular Migraine. So it's extremely helpful. It's everything I wish I would have known when I first got diagnosed. So if you're interested in that, that's a great resource. And I guess I'm sorry, I'm running close, but if there's any more questions, I'd love to answer questions right now. So I'll stop sharing here.
Perfect. Yeah, we have a lot of good questions for you.
Okay.
So I will start with some questions. Someone asked, what does vestibular therapy involve?
Vestibular therapy. So it's kind of controversial for vestibular migraine. It's basically a series of eye or head movements. Sometimes they'll have you bounce a ball and just watch that ball. Sometimes they'll have you balance on an uneven surface or look at patterns that cause dizziness. I highly recommend doing it, not getting exercises online and doing it with a qualified vestibular therapist, because when I was doing it initially, I was doing it with therapists who didn't really understand migraine, and it was hurting me rather than helping. And what Dr. Bay says is that you really have to get that migraine under control first before it starts making a difference for you. And that's exactly what we did. We fit it into my treatment plan later on. And actually, my therapist worked with me on looking at YouTube videos of people walking through casinos in Vegas before a trip to Vegas. And I did so much better with like the lights and the sounds and everything like that. It's like a vestibular migraine person's worst nightmare, I think. But just practicing for that, it can kind of get your brain used to it and you learn to compensate. So it's essentially.
That's a great point. We can find so much online, which is good, but sometimes it can be bad too.
Yeah. And you just want to make sure you're not overdoing it, because that's definitely possible.
Right. Someone asked suggestions for healthy snacks.
Oh, healthy snacks.
Yeah.
You know, I love to make hummus and have that in my fridge all the time. I have a smoky carrot hummus in my cookbook that is really delicious if you're looking for something kind of interesting rather than the regular hummus. I'll do the Pepita protein bars. So it's basically sunflower seeds, hemp seeds, and pepitas all kind of mixed together into these protein bars, and I'll freeze them and keep them on hand. So it's good for protein. It's mixed with oats, so you get a little bit of energy with that too. Chips and fruit, anything like that is a good thing to keep on hand. I try not to, I know we have to watch our sugar sometimes with migraine, so just a cookie here and there, like shortbread cookies are a good thing to have on hand if you want something sweet, but just have one, or try to eat it with some protein. So those are kind of the typical snacks I do.
That sounds great. And one thing you said when you were talking is that you make things and you freeze them. And yes. I never ever think about freezing stuff. And I need to do that more. You know, make something for dinner, but make extra and freeze it. And I don't.
Yeah, because we don't feel like cooking all the time. I mean, some nights I'm exhausted. You know, some nights you have attacks, and I think when you have an attack, the easiest thing you can do is a smoothie. Like I have a anti-inflammatory smoothie on my website that has ginger and pear with it. It's very soothing to the stomach. The ginger can kind of help with nausea a little bit. I've had people say it really helps with their attacks, kind of bring down that head pain. So that's a good option too.
I've read that ginger is good for that.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. How challenging are the recipes for people without much experience cooking?
I think they're pretty easy. You know, half the time I feel like it's a mental hurdle. And I say this, I have a roasted chicken recipe in my cookbook, and I think a lot of people are afraid to roast a whole chicken. But I even have a video on my YouTube about it showing how easy it is. You basically just clean it, cover it in butter or oil, depending on if you're dairy free, and roast it in the oven for an hour. It turns out beautiful. It's delicious and healthy. And I think it's just that mental hurdle of really not knowing where to start. So the recipes in my cookbook are pretty beginner friendly. And then if you feel like you need more help, or if there's something you can't figure out, like, come to the recipe chat and I'm here to help you. I've sent some of my readers like videos on how to make mayonnaise. Like, I'll sit there and watch them if they can't get it to come together. And, you know, I'm willing to help you along with that journey too. So, but half of it, I think, is that mental hurdle.
Right. Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's good to know, everybody, right? Okay, let's jump back to, at what point did your symptoms become 24/7? And at what point did they stop becoming 24/7?
So they probably became 24/7 about a month or two since my initial feeling of dizziness. And I think it's because I didn't get treatment and no one knew what was wrong with me. So I was just living with these migraine attacks and letting them go, because I wasn't getting any treatment to stop them. That's when they became chronic and constant. It took me from the time I got diagnosed, it took me about a year to get out of that constant dizziness. And that was with, you know, Dr. Bay's help, like doing medication, supplements, diet. I mean, I probably didn't have that break in dizziness till about 4 to 5 months on the diet. And I thought it wasn't working for me. And I think a lot of people give up too early, but getting out of chronic migraine is hard. Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart, and you really have to work at it. And I was throwing everything at it, and I was frustrated, and I felt like I was never going to get better. And, you know, I thankfully had a really good team of doctors telling me, look, stick with it. We can do tweaks here and there, but you know, you're seeing small improvements. And I think as long as you're seeing some small improvements, little bits of hope, just to stick with things and,
you're right,
you know, carry that bit of hope.
Yeah, two important things. You didn't give up, and your doctors didn't give up. You know, those are two important things. So
yeah.
So one more question. Do you think you will add more vegan recipes to your repertoire?
I do. I'm working on them. You know, a lot of recipes can actually be made vegan in my cookbook. I think over 70 of them are vegetarian. Okay. And if you need help making them vegan, again, reach out to me. I can help you modify things. A lot of them can be made vegan if you just switch to oils instead of using butter, or leaving out cheese here and there. That's an easy fix. But yeah, it's something that I do try to do.
Perfect.
As well. So when I start feeling a little less nauseous, I'll get back into the recipe development again.
Okay, well, great to know. We loved having you on, talking to us about your recipes and your advocacy. And from all of us here today, we congratulate you on your pregnancy. That's such great news.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. So now we are at the point where we have a 10-minute break. We will reconvene at 11:15.